Hey, what's up, guys? If I sound a little bit different, I'm using a different microphone. I've gotten some complaints from you guys that I sound too much like Woody Harrelson. That's actually a function in my editing software. So I'm going to be going in there and working on that to see if I can prevent myself from sounding too much like Woody Harrelson. Anyway. What I'm going to do today is go in this and reprogram the board. And I figured when I do this, it would be a good time to kind of show you the ins and outs if you want to get one of these replica Blackbird boards from Sergey, because it's arguably the best modification that you could do to a stock Blackbird. Best bang for the buck, I'd say. Yeah, definitely best bang for the buck. All right, if this were a stock Blackbird, you would have a muzzle. A lot of people are confused about these barrels, and when you're new to them, the actual barrel on a stock Blackbird goes all the way down here, and then it goes through the frame and screws into a nut. Now, so it would be the threads are actually right in here. So the way these Russian barrels work is this collar just screws down onto that. Now, if it were a stock Blackbird, what you would do is you would remove that muzzle. And sometimes the barrel comes with the muzzle. You don't need to take the barrel off to do what I'm going to do if it's a stock Blackbird, but I have to with these barrels because for some reason they didn't want this coming off all the way. So that's one of my pet peeves about these Russian barrels. It's probably not going to piss anybody off nearly as much as it does me, because you're not taking these things on and off every day like I am. Anyway, so that collar, that muzzle would just come off. On the Blackbirds, it's about that long, and what it's there for is it just gives you something for a set screw to push on, holding on that fake suppressor. I think it's a 4mm Allen wrench that you can put into the barrel because it is rifled, and loosen it if you ever had to take the barrel off. But again, if this were a stock Blackbird barrel, you would not need to remove the barrel. So then you can separate the two halves. Now on a Blackbird, you'd have your rear sight up here, and it's usually in the way of getting the solenoid cover off. So you'd probably have to run that screw out to raise up the rear aperture, and then that comes off like so, and then it comes back, and then it just comes off. These, at this point, besides this aftermarket barrel, these wires would be the only thing holding it on if you had that muzzle off. Now, I desolder these and resolder them. If you look closely, it goes through this little wafer, and so I'll just hit that with a soldering iron, pull it out, do the same on the other, and then I'll take a solder sucker, heat up the solder, pull all the solder out of the holes so I can just stick them back in the holes and then resolder them. If you've just got basic soldering know-how, or even know what a soldering iron is, you can take these out with that iron and just stick them back on these contacts. If you see here, this just bridges between a little wire on either side. Might be able to see them down in there. So I've got to take this barrel off now. Actually, it'll be easier to desolder this first, so I'm going to do that. This particular soldering iron that I'm using is an IUAOYUE 968A, and it has a peculiar feature on it as well. And I was talking to Sergey about it, and I explained to him that if I looked away from the temperature on the unit, it would turn off. And he just says, well, safety first. Seems to be cooperating right now. So at this point, you can pull these wires to the side. It'll be the same. It'll just be brown or green on a stock Blackbird. And at that point, with your barrel on, you could pull it out. The barrel would stay on here, but I just have to remove this. So that'll be a little bit different if you happen to have one of these 400mm barrels. And if you do need to remove the barrel, put your magazine in it, because it goes into this barrel nut. It keeps that barrel nut from spinning, because you don't want that barrel nut spinning, because it's just held in there in plastic. You don't want to strip it out. And there's also a couple of washers in most Blackbirds. And I'll show you where they go. So that nut's just being held in there with the magazine. And you can see the nut right there with the two washer shims between the nut and the frame. There's nothing holding it in place right now except love. There's not much of that. All right, now this is what we are looking for. Now there's a Phillips head screw in here and another one right here. Make sure that your batteries are out. Probably should have done that before this. You don't want these two wires touching when it's on and you pull the trigger. I've got a video, probably a couple of videos on my channel about doing Sergey's board installs that would behoove you to look up. And as far as looking things up, I've got all my videos tagged. So if you look up something like Sergey's board install, it'll probably just take you to one of my videos, or like solenoid adjustment. Take you right to what you want to see. And now we have our power switch slider. Just comes out. It's kind of important that when you put this back together, it be in here. If you try to put it back together and it's in there, you can break this spring. So when you take it apart, just put it in here so you don't lose it. and the trigger comes out. There's a little spring in here, so just put your thumb over it and it comes right out like so with the spring. And the board, the stock board, you can just grab on these wires and give it a tug and it'll come right out. I'm not going to do that with this board, but you don't really need to know why, do you? I'm just kidding. I'll show you why in just a minute. It's easier to show you than explain. Okay, I was worried about messing up the backing on these buttons. These particular ones are individually backed with, I'm not sure what kind of tape it is. It looks like electrical tape, but that just holds the buttons in. And when you go to put your Sergey's board in here, yeah, because I mean, we're pretty much done. At this point, you would drill your holes. Hit me up if you need a template. You order the board from Sergey and he'll send you usually 4 buttons. And these drill out to 1/4 inch. Make your window with a Dremel tool. I like to use this type of carbide bit for mostly roughing that out, and then I'll go in with some micro files and clean it up. And during that process you can put the board in and out. Just don't do your backing while you're doing test fits, because you'll mess it up if you're putting the board in and out and in and out, and it'll be rubbing on that backing. Alright guys, now we get to the good part. If you saw my last video, you'll remember that that was the first time that I had tried out the new program. And well, yeah, there were a couple of bugs, and Sergey and I got together last night and he fixed them. And when I had that issue where it wouldn't fire, what was going on? That was a pulse issue. The pulse was way too low, and it was just a bug in the programming. Well, that's been worked out. And I was also looking at this board while I was doing that, and I was thinking, did he do SPS and 1/2 milliseconds for this replica Blackbird board? And sure enough, he did. So we have 1 to 10 round burst, full auto. Let's see, 500 rounds a minute, up to 1200, 100 increments, and then pulse in 1/2 milliseconds. Let's see where he started. At 3. That's great. So this opens up a whole new world, believe it or not. The only other board with SPS is the one for our Freebird, and it's a 5K board, so it'll shoot a lot faster than this one. But again, to get a Blackbird to shoot that fast, you have to do a lot of stuff inside the magazine, which is why you need to send it to me at that point. But this board was developed, for you guys at home to give your Blackbird one of the baddest upgrades for the money, the baddest upgrade for the money with this board. And the SPS function, since we've got all these different fire rates, it's going to favor a particular pulse rate over another. Now, I wouldn't say, like with that 400 millimeter barrel that's on that one, I wouldn't say you'd ever need to use more than 7. If you had a chronograph, you can see if I'm a liar or not. You can go on up and see if you get any more velocity, but I think you're probably going to get as much velocity as you're going to at 7. Now, because each fire rate likes a specific pulse over another, now we've got half millisecond pulse rates. And so that gives you double the chance for it to have a really, really happy spot for each fire rate. Anyway, yeah, this is what I was talking about with being finished business. Because when I came into this game, it took 2 months to get my Blackbird from Max. I told somebody it was a month, but looking back it was 2 months because I had to get the circuit board. That's how I met Sergey, actually. Ray didn't have any in, and he said, well, just contact Sergey. Contacted Sergey. Sergey made a board, shipped it to Ray. Ray put it in. He finally sent me the gun. It was like 2 months later. Yeah, and then I found that 2000 didn't even really work. And I did a lot of shooting and research and found out why, fixed it, and moved on. But like I say, at that point, it was like you can't have Sergey's board without my help, and we really didn't like that. Well, I didn't anyway, because I was like his only customer at that point. And so I really wanted to circle back around and come back to this, just so you're not getting something that you think you have to have a different motor and all this stuff for, and then get it and put it all together and not even have it work. This is it. This is optimized for a stock magazine, guys. This is I am so proud of this, to be quite frank with you. And Sergey could really use the money. So if you've got a stock Blackbird, just go ahead and send him an email, and he'll make one of these for you and send it right out. I just talked to him. He's got a lot of the just the boards, just waiting to build them. And the reason that I'm not selling them right now is because I'm trying to help him out. So guys, just send him an email, tell him you want one of these. Tell him you want 2 of them. They're not that expensive. And I'll show you some more tips on putting it back together. All right, now, after you get your board back in here, you're gonna have these sliders. Just go ahead and put them back like they were gonna fit over the original switches, and they'll just cover up those holes. They won't do anything at this point. They'll just cover up those holes. It's gonna be a second for me to put this in. Let's see. For some reason, these replicas are really tight. A regular Blackbird is not normally this tight. So normally when I do that backing, I do it with a piece of fiberglass thread reinforced tape, and I'll cut it that long, and then I'll put the edge of it on something that I can cut into I'll take one of those edge finders. Hang on, I'll get it and show you what I'm talking about. It's complete overkill, but if you take one of these edge finders, I guess that's what you call it, and push it in there, that's the pattern that you'll have down there. So you just take this on your piece of tape, you transfer these little cutouts to the piece of tape, cut it out, and then just put it down in there. At that point, you have to cut this hole out. But the way they've done it, if you can get it to work with just little patches on the back of each button, more power to you. And I'll tell you something else. I felt really stupid about this yesterday. Give me just a second. Another thing, when you're putting this in here, you have to get these tabs. You can take this off too at this point. You have to get these tabs through holes down there for the batteries to touch. You can look down there and kind of see if they're going into the holes. What I'll do is I usually get something and poke them, and if you don't get them in there, you'll fold them over and they'll be folded up under the board, and your batteries won't be able to touch. So I'm looking for my favorite poking stick. Another thing about these boards, you might have to notch it out a little bit right in there to get it to go forward enough, because there's a little ridge right here. And also there's two plastic bosses somewhere in here on the inside of this housing that fit into, let me just get another board. Right here, those bosses fit right into there. You may have to take a small round file and work those just a little bit to get it to snap in. I use jeweler's files for that when I need to do it. A lot of times you don't have to. I typically find that I do have to notch them out a little bit right there though for a Blackbird. Just don't get into the copper trace on the board. So I'm just poking those battery tabs down into the holes. And right now it's rocking on those bosses, so let's make sure it's on them. Okay, now we are in there like swimwear. This LED goes in that little indentation right there. You can have it up sticking out of it if you like. You can put it flush. I usually just put them like that. Get it nice and straight. And this is what I felt really dumb about. These windows, I said, guys, if you're gonna send me these things, please cut them for the boards. And then they sent them to me, the replicas, and they were ready to go for Sergey's board, and they sent me these windows, and I'm like, man, crap, I gotta fit these windows, because in the past I would have to cut this out and then take a piece of plexiglass and shape it to fit perfectly in that hole with a friction fit. And I got to looking at these, and I got to looking at that, and I got to looking at these, and I got to looking at that, and I did this. And I said, well, hot damn. I could have saved hundreds, literally hundreds of hours on that. Now, you don't want something permanent holding that in. You wouldn't want to super glue it, because it would, you couldn't get your board out if you ever needed to take it out. Like if that were to turn into an unhappy face, you know, if that frown got turned up, to turn this frown upside down again, you'd need to have the board out of there to do that, and you couldn't get it out if that was, you know, glued really solidly on there. So what I'm doing with these is I'm just putting a little bit of hot glue on either side of those. That way I can pop it loose to get the board out. But yeah, I said, man. And you know, it just goes to show. I'm humbled quite often. Not being a particularly smart person. I'm just smart enough to know when I'm humbled. That's about it. But it just goes to show, you know, how dumb we are, really. Just, I mean, something that simple. And the reason I did it like that is because that's how Ray from Drawsmax did it. Oh well. Obla di, obla da, huh? Alright. Now, to get this finished, your wires, I usually just take this wire, and you can see there's a spot for it right there to fit in, right next to the trigger. And this one, you can go behind these little transistors or these little pixie deflectors or whatever the hell they are. You can put it behind them. I don't do that because those things get pretty hot. So I just run the wire around front like that and then just tuck it right in there. And then we get our trigger. You see that pin in there is kind of offset. That's because when it's sitting in here, it's going to hold those wires. If it's dead center and you put it in there, you can get in there with like a knife or something and push it over, but it's offset and it holds those wires in there a little better. So you put there's a little pin on here that holds your spring. I'll turn the spring to where the end of it is not going to snag on the way down. And then just hold it like so. You tuck it under there like that. And you work the trigger back because it won't go down unless it goes back. And when you're pushing it all the way down, making it go home, just make sure that that spring doesn't flip on you. Okay, so there we go for that. And oh yeah, I gotta glue my window in there. So let me do that and I'll be right back. Okay, so we got that glued in. We got our LED in the right spot. You might want to check, make sure your buttons are working, because you can drill them in the wrong spot. If you drill your hole in the wrong spot, like if you get them too low, your button will just hit on the board and it won't depress that switch. What you can do at that point is take the same Dremel bit that you use for making your window, and you can remove a little bit of material right there in front of that switch so the button can push it. So there's a little fix for you in case you mess up. Alright, don't forget to put this back on, because I don't know how many times I've done that, but it's been more than once, maybe. Okay, now this part, after you've gotten your sliders back on there, they don't go on anything, they just sit there. You need to make sure that this drops in that. And don't force anything. Make sure that pushes on the back of the LED. Okay. Push your buttons again. At this point, it's a good idea to put your batteries in here. Hold this tight, turn it on, and make sure your buttons work. Make sure your trigger works too. Just make sure that these are not touching when you pull the trigger. Okay, there's screws go in here. That's a good way to keep from stripping plastic out. Just run it around backwards till you hear it click down. That way you know the thread's going into the right spot. Okay, yeah, I'm so used to working with different barrels that this is confusing to me. We will get through this though. Okay, so now at this point, if you had the stock barrel or a Gem C or Draws Max barrel, the barrel would still be on here and you could just slide it in and finish putting it back together. These barrels are a little trickier. So we go ahead and do like so, get our sleeve stuck in it. And I'm going to go ahead and solder this back together. For these wires, what I like to do, you can see which one's on the bottom and which one's on top. I'll run the bottom one through here first, and then just kind of click it down in there, and then I'll run the top one down over that. Sometimes they get hung up on that solenoid and can give you a little bit of a fit, but it's not bad. Doesn't matter which hole they go in. Kind of like some girls I've known. And there are also videos on YouTube of how to solder. I would not be the one to ask about that. I do push the iron up against the wire to hold it in place, keep it from popping out, and then push down on it while that's solidifying. Okay, now for this barrel, we want to get the solenoid cover on here first because it latches in there. And once these two are tightened together, once these two halves are tightened together, this will not come out. So have it a little bit apart, push it in the back, bring it all the way down, and now you can snug them up. But we need to get our nut back on here, our barrel nut and 2 washers. I'm going to try just putting these on here right like so. And this goes in flat side up, pokey side back. And you can see that groove fits into, well, there's a groove here that fits into rather. Okay. And now you can hold this with your finger. Make sure this collar is screwed all the way out towards the muzzle to give you some room to work with. Be careful when you're putting it through here. And you can see it right there about to go into the frame. And now I can feel it with my finger. This is usually where you spend a lot of time trying to thread the barrel into the nut. And we're in. So at this point, before I tighten it down, put our magazine back in. Now we're not going to risk stripping it out. Tighten that down nice and snug. Just make sure that's down like that and that. There. Make sure that's nice and snug. Then you can tighten the 2 halves together. Just look in here and make sure everything's lined up before you tighten it down. All right, that is basically done. And that is the replica Blackbird 1200 round a minute board. And you can purchase this from Sergey. Here is his email address. Hit him up. He would love to sell you 1, 2, or however many you want to get. All right, later.